Welcome to Heritage Church. I'm Jeff Forster. I'm one of the pastors here. I was standing backstage. I could hear you people singing. Man, you got good voices. You should get like a bus and go on the road or something. I saw Bob Seger still touring. He's 74, so you guys can do it. Sound great. Well, we are in a message series called Stand, and today we're talking about standing up. And if you missed last week, we kind of laid the foundation, understanding that if you're a follower of Jesus, you claim to be a Christian, you're a follower of Jesus, you will stand out. And if you missed that, go back and watch that one. If you're not yet a follower of Jesus, this is a really safe series and a safe church for you to just kind of come and investigate the claims of Christianity, the claims of faith, and we're really glad that you're here. Today, we're talking about standing up. Next week, we're going to talk about standing strong, and the week after that, we'll talk about standing in faith, and then we'll talk about standing firm in the fire. We're taking 5 significant events in the life of Daniel, a guy in the Bible that God used in an amazing way, and we're taking these 5 key events and breaking them down into each of these weeks. And I got to tell you, this one, of all 5 messages we're going to do in this series, this one's the most difficult one for me to preach, and out of the entire series. And I think one of the reasons is because it's not too much of a stretch that some of you are going to hear us as we talk about standing up. You're going to hear this in the wrong way, right? Some people, would you agree with me that some people are too confrontational? Would anybody raise your hand on that, right? So we need to take a stand, and sometimes it requires a confrontation, absolutely, on important things, but some people are going to take this, and it's going to be like handing them a loaded gun and a fifth of whiskey. Just let them run with it, right? And that's not what we're saying. We're not giving permission to be a jerk. I don't know if you knew this, but a Christian that's a jerk is just a jerk, is what they are. So we don't have to be that way. So don't hear this the wrong way. How many of you would say this? How many of you would say that you're naturally less confrontational? You're kind of a non-confrontational person. Raise your hand. Okay, good. And there's way more in here, but you were afraid that was too confrontational to raise your hand. Challenging people. How many of you would say the other way, though? You kind of lean towards being, I lean towards being confrontational. How many of you would say, go ahead, raise both hands. You know you want to, right? Yeah, exactly. You're just waiting for me to mess up, aren't you? You're just waiting. You're that guy, man. You're just waiting for me to mess up. You can fire off an angry email. Go ahead and send it to Jeff at IDon'tGiveARip.com, and we'll be happy to see if we can respond to that. So there's 2 characters that are really significant in the book of Daniel, keep coming up over and over again. There's several others, but the 2 big ones, Daniel, obviously the book's named after him, and a king named Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of the Babylonian Empire during the 600 BC era. And he was a bad guy on every level. This guy was incredibly powerful. He was very dangerous. He would obliterate whole communities, whole cities. He was abusive. He was incredibly prideful. He was very self-serving. All throughout history, and even today, there's powerful people. There's good kings and bad kings. And you just pray that you have a good king. But he was not. He was very self-serving. You can look it up. Saddam Hussein, many, many times in speeches, mentioned the fact that he believed that he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. That's what he believed. And so, anyways, his pride was over the top. He wanted, at one point, he comes to this time in his life where he wants everybody to worship him because he personally was so impressed with all of his incredible accomplishments. He had built one of the largest empires in history up to that point. He had subjugated several of the other very powerful groups in the world. He'd built these big temples and he'd built these massive cities. And Babylon became a hub for knowledge and education and all these kinds of things. And he just felt like he had done this amazing job. And so he wanted everybody to give him attention. And during this time, his pride keeps going through the roof. He's becoming more and more abusive. He's hurting the people that he's supposed to be serving as king. And finally, God shows up to him in a dream. And here's his description of the dream that he had. He said, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. But one night I had a dream that frightened me. I saw visions that terrified me as I laid in my bed. So I issued an order calling in all the wise men of Babylon so they could tell me what my dream meant. So he had this sense, this dream means something. And so I need somebody to tell me what it means. And when all the magicians and all the enchanters and the astrologers and the fortune tellers came in, I told them the dream, but they could not tell me what it meant. And at last Daniel came in before me, and I told him the dream. It's interesting, the words there, it says they could not tell me what it meant. I think this is interesting because some translations say could not, other translations say would not. And when you hear the dream, you kind of know they would not, right? They didn't want to tell him what this dream meant. So they didn't want to tell Nebuchadnezzar the bad news. So Daniel is put in a position where he has to confront the king. And he's going to do the right thing, and the right thing is to bring the message to the king, and so he's going to have to do it. But I want to talk about this idea of confrontation. For some people, there's two confrontational extremes. If you're filling in the notes in your program, the first one is some are unwilling to confront. It's none of my business. Just live and let live. Who am I to judge? It doesn't matter that you're on the verge of ruining your life. It doesn't matter that you're ruining other people's lives. I'm not going to get involved. I don't even want to see it, right? I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to get part of that confrontation. Have you ever seen video footage of like attacks on the subway or something, and people just stand around and pretend like they don't see it? They just look the other way. I'm the kind of person who goes, who does that? Who doesn't engage? But this is what many of us want to do. We don't want to engage. We're unwilling to confront. Somebody's ruining their life or ruining the lives of people around them, but who am I to judge? I don't want to get involved. The other side, the other extreme, is some people love to confront, but they confront unlovingly. Just go ahead and write unlovingly in all caps, because that's the way they like to type on Facebook and on social media, is in all caps. It's what I call drive-by confrontation. You know what I'm talking about? The people just love that you're an idiot and you're a moron and you should think more like me and all this stuff. And they just spew all the time confrontation. It doesn't matter. You see them coming and you're like, oh no, I hope, don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact. Really, you're gonna wear that belt with those shoes? It's after Memorial Day, man, right? Whatever. Just confront you about everything. Unlovingly. They think it's their God-given right to correct everyone that they disagree with. But we're all in a situation, all of us have people in our lives that we kind of see. Maybe you have a child and that's making some bad decisions, a teenager or a young adult, or maybe, just coming up to the end of the school year, and you're trying to figure out, how do I lovingly and effectively help them without being, unloving or angry or whatever? How do I see this family member that's making some bad financial decisions, and how do I help them without coming off as being judgmental? Or you have a relative who is judgmental, and every time you get together, they pick a fight with somebody in the family, and somebody needs to stand up and say, hey, you just can't behave that way. That's not the values of our family. You're hurting other people. Or, for some of you, maybe you have a wife who already has 2 puppies, and now she wants to get a 3rd. And you have to say, sure, go ahead, babe. I want you to be happy. No. So, if you don't know, our dog died a year ago. We had him for 15 years, and he died right after Christmas, and my wife immediately started wanting, my wife and my daughter. So, I'm outnumbered now. It used to be there were 3, I have 2 older sons, but they're moved out. So now, I'm outnumbered 2-1. The estrogen is way higher than the testosterone in our house, right? I get voted down all the time now, and so she wanted a puppy. And I said, no. And all the men at Heritage Church were like, go, Jeff. You stand in there. You're the last man, right? And then we got a puppy and named him Gucci. And I had so many guys that next week just go, ugh. They just look at me with this disappointed, you failed all of mankind, Jeff. And then my wife and my daughter started asking for another puppy. They wanted another puppy. And it was because our Gucci was lonely. And so, he needs a puppy. And I was like, absolutely not. And then we got Chanel. And so we have Gucci and Chanel at home. And Gucci has his own puppy now. And now, I was sitting in the car yesterday. And both my wife and my daughter at the same time we're looking at puppies on Facebook. At the same time, I'm like, you've barely had her 3 months and you're already cheating on her too? I tell you, when I die, my wife's going to start looking she's going to look, do we want a big one, a little one, a fat one, a rich one? That's what she's going to do. But sometimes you just have to confront, but you've got to confront in a loving way. So God's goal for your life, Pastor Kevin reminded us of this, God's goal for your life is to be truthful and to be tactful. To be truthful and tactful. And that requires that we operate from a position, a place of care and love for others. Here's what Ephesians tells us in the Bible. It says, we will speak the truth in love. It's interesting. Love does not mean that we ignore the truth, and truth does not give us permission to be unloving. We speak the truth in love, right? The truth without love is just mean, right? That's usually what we do. We wind up being mean. Love without truth is uncaring. So we have to do both. We have to speak the truth in love. And then he says, when we do this, when we speak the truth in love, we grow in every way more and more like Jesus. One of the best things we can do as people is to think, how would Jesus respond to this? What would Jesus say? And how can I be more like Jesus in the way that I confront a person? Look at this one. I love this. Solomon told us this in Proverbs 27. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. It's talking about, you ever have somebody who just butters you up and you know they're completely fake? They're complimentary all the time, and you know they're lying. You know. But so have you ever had a friend? Don't raise your hand on this, but you can probably think back. If you've ever had a good friend, a really good friend, you've probably had that really good friend at least one time point out a blind spot in your life. Hey, I don't know if you noticed this, but, right? You ever have somebody go, hey, you got something in your teeth, right? Are you? It's a little embarrassing, right? There's a little embarrassing, but aren't you glad they mentioned that? One time I came out here and spoke, right here. One of my good friends sat right there. One of my other very good friends, who's here right now, sat right there. My pants were unzipped for the entire message. The whole message. We would show video of it, but I'm embarrassed. And they didn't say one thing. Not, hey, right? Nothing. I know, I don't have any friends here. That's my problem. Wounds from a friend. Sometimes when a friend has to correct you, when a friend has to point something out, it's a little embarrassing, but thank God it was a friend and not an enemy. An enemy would use it as a weapon, right, to punish you. But a friend cares. And so your measure here, I want to be better. I don't know if you knew this. Many of you don't. I've told a lot of people, though, every week I get a report card for my message. And I do. And they sit there with a timer because, one of my famous things is I give you all the bonus material I have every week. Sometimes it goes long. So it'll tell me at 3 minutes and 15 seconds, you finally got to point number one, and you didn't really deliver that good, and the joke fell flat, whatever. I go through there. Or, wow, that was really solid. It worked, and what you said on this point was really powerful. Like today, man, this is going to be a great report card. I can already feel it. But sometimes I'll get a report card. I don't know if you knew this. I'll get a report card. I'll get like a C or a C-. I pay these clowns. And they give me a C or a C- something. I've gotten like 5 or 6 C's this year. But I want to be better. And so I have people I trust. I'm not asking you to do it. I don't trust all you people to do it. I don't even know why you keep coming back. But, people that I trust, I want to know how am I doing? Is my delivery good? Does it make sense? Was I encouraging to people? Did I take the complex ideas of the Bible and put them on the bottom shelf where everybody can understand them? I want to be better at that. And that requires that I have to have some friends I trust who can speak to me even when I come out thinking, I'm going to get a great accolades. Jeff, that may have been the greatest single message I've ever heard in my life. But then I see it and I get a C or a C-, and I'm like, when there's a gap between what you expect and what you get, you decide what you put in the middle. You trust them or you don't, right? Do they mean to hurt me or do they mean to help me? Wounds from a friend are designed to help you. Sometimes I got to tell you things you don't want to hear, but we all have blind spots. There's nothing wrong with that. You can't be everything and everywhere and see all the things in your life all the time. You need people that you care about. And so wounds from a friend can be trusted. It's the same way for you, though. You've got to be thinking about how to be tactful when you have to, inflict a wound on a friend. Turn it around. How would you feel if they came to you about this same thing? And you say, well, I want somebody to say something to me. Yes, but you'd want them to say it in a tactful way, in a loving way, in a kind way, and in a direct way without being a jerk about it. So this is true. Look at this one. Solomon also tells us this in the same chapter. He says, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. Have you ever had that friend that just makes you better? I was in the band back when I was in high school, and I wound up getting a music scholarship, and I played trumpet, and my freshman year, I wound up being the solo trumpet in our college band. And the guy who sat next to me was a really, really good trumpet player. The reality is he probably should have been solo, and I should have just been first chair, but it was the other way around. And man, we just played off each other. We could tell where the other one was going. He made me better. I made him better, constantly getting better and better in every area. Some of the areas where he was weak, I was strong. Some of the areas where I was strong, he was weak. And we could say, hey, you didn't play it that way. It's supposed to sound like this. You're supposed to have this tonguing, or it's supposed to be this note, or you're a little flat on that, whatever. And we can encourage each other without being offended, because iron sharpens iron. When you get around somebody who's challenging you and making you better, you know exactly what it's talking about. Help him put that good edge on you. But you know what it takes to get sharp? Friction. It does. So some of us are so prideful. We're kind of jerks a little bit on the inside. We feel like it's okay to tell everybody else how they should fix their issues, but we're not willing to let somebody come and challenge us. You need a friend that little bit of friction, you know, makes you better. It makes you stronger. For most of us, those of you that are married, your spouse could be that if you would permit it. It's one of the, God gave you your spouse to make you better, to make you holy, to make you more like God, not just to make you happy all the time. God's given you these people in your life, but you have to be willing to allow just a little bit of that friction without deciding that you're going to put distrust between what you expected. I thought he was going to say, Jeff, you ushered before the throne of God today. What he said is, it was a C-. It wasn't your best effort. Right? And so I have to decide what goes in the middle. I trust him. He loves me and wants me to be better. Or I don't trust him. He's a jerk. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. Right? So we have to be truthful. We have to be tactful when we're the ones delivering it, and we have to speak from love. When we're the ones receiving it, the other side of it, we have to be humble, and we have to understand that God makes us better through the people he's put us around. So anyways, that was a side note. Let's move on. Daniel starts confronting constructively. Here's what happens. Last week, when we first started telling the history of Daniel, we started off when Daniel was in his late teens. He was probably somewhere 17, 18 years old when he is kidnapped by the Babylonian Empire, and then finally, constrained to be part of King Nebuchadnezzar's court and all that kind of stuff, and they start training him. He was in his teens. But now, at this point, chapter 4 in Daniel, he's in his 50s, late 40s, early 50s at this point. And so he has this long-established relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. He's considered one of the top advisors to the most powerful man on the planet at the time. He has this long history. Nebuchadnezzar trusts him. He genuinely seems to care for Nebuchadnezzar by the way that he communicates with this king. He wants at one point, he's praying for the strength and for the betterment of this empire. God tells the people of Israel to pray for the strength of the city and the health of the city that you're living in, because you're going to be here a while. And so Daniel genuinely seems to care about Nebuchadnezzar, because as the king goes, so does the empire. And so he is in this relationship, trusted and genuinely caring. So after Nebuchadnezzar tells the dream, he tells what it's all about. Daniel doesn't want to give the meaning. Here, let me give you the dream here. He is told that there's this large tree that's in the middle of the earth. This is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar is having. And it grew tall, and it grew strong, and it was reaching to the heavens, and the fruit was available to all of humanity, and the shade provided comfort to all of humanity. The whole world benefited from the tree, and the birds were nesting in the branches and all this stuff. But then finally, the Holy One from heaven says, you know what? I'm going to stop this. And he scatters the fruit, and he chases the animals from the shade, and he cuts down the tree, and he just leaves a stump in the ground. And specifically, Nebuchadnezzar knew that it was so that everyone would know that the Most High rules over all the kingdoms of the world. So Daniel, what does that mean? This is why I said all those sorcerers and people, they would not answer the question, because I think a third grader could tell you what that story is right there. That dream was really, really clear. Daniel, he's standing there, he's like, I just, you know what? I'm retired now. I used to interpret dreams and offer advice to the most powerful king on the planet, but now I just golf and garden. Silly me. I've lost touch. I don't know. I'm retired. Or he could have said, king, I just think you ate too much pizza last night. It was just a bad dream. It doesn't mean anything. But it turns out dreams have meanings a lot of times, not always. The kinds of dreams that you remember that have these, significant meanings are usually early in your sleep. I'm not saying God comes to you early in your sleep. That is not what I'm saying. If you ever see God talk to you at the foot of your bed, go check yourself in, because that doesn't happen. That's not what's happening. But dreams sometimes do have more of a hint at what's going on in you psychologically. There's all kinds of study about that. How many of you ever had a dream where you were falling? You ever have a dream where you're falling and you catch yourself? So that usually happens pretty early in your sleep. And it means, normally, they would say that it means that subconsciously you're afraid of something that you can't control. That there's usually something in your life at that time, especially if you have them back to back or fairly often. There's something in your life that you're not able to control right now. Have you ever had a dream? I used to dream this all the time in school. Did you ever have a dream where you were forgetting everything that you were supposed to put on an exam? Did you ever have, I forgot to study for an exam? Some of you, forgot to study for an exam. That just means that you didn't feel prepared. I've heard people talk before that they were supposed to give a presentation at work, but their dream was all about when they were in school and felt like they weren't ready for an exam. If you've ever felt stuck in a dream, you ever have one of those where you just feel like you can't move and you just feel stuck and everything's happening around you, but you can't participate? That one usually means that you're feeling overwhelmed in your life psychologically. This is an interesting one. They said if you dream about dirty water, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand on this one. If you ever dream about dirty water, you're probably sick. That's what it means. There's something inside going on that you're sick. So if you're having that dream, go to the doctor. As soon as we're done here, go to the doctor. You're probably sick. This is my favorite one, chocolate. You ever dream about chocolate? Sometimes I'm just floating in it. Oh, it's so good. If you ever dream about chocolate, they say that that usually means that you feel like inside your subconscious is telling you that you feel like you deserve to be rewarded. That's usually what it means. If you've ever had a dream that you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom. Get up, wake up, go. Right? Some of you are sleeping right now. If you feel like go. You drank that big cup of coffee on the way in. Right? That whole, you ever feel like you showed up in class and didn't have any clothes? Or show up at work, didn't have any clothes, right? It means you're feeling vulnerable, you're feeling insecure there. I'll tell you the one that drives me nuts the most is sometimes, this has happened a few times, where I wake up in the morning, I'm so happy, Bonnie and I are so in love, and then suddenly it's just ice cold. Because Bonnie dreamed that she died, and then I married some 20-year-old. And she's mad at me all day long for something I didn't do. I'm like, yeah, look at me. I got all these 20-year-olds all lined up just waiting. What in the world? But she'd be mad. How dare you? I'm like, how dare I what? I didn't do nothing. But it's in her mind, So anyways, Nebuchadnezzar calls Daniel forward. Dreams a lot of times tell you what's going on in your subconscious. On occasion, on a very rare occasion in the Bible, God would use a dream to tell people something, and specifically this king who couldn't listen to anybody else. God gives him this message. And so he says, Daniel, what does this mean? Nobody else can tell me what this means. And so Daniel says, if you look it up in Daniel chapter 4, Daniel says, "Oh king, I wish that this dream was about your enemies and not about you." I wish you knew how serious I am about that statement. I wish it was about your enemies and not about you. But then he steps up to the plate. He's going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And he says, "That tree, your majesty, is you. For you've grown strong and great, and your greatness reaches up to the heaven." I don't know if you knew this. There's a bunch of inscriptions in different buildings and different things throughout Iraq and through the Babylonian Empire where Nebuchadnezzar referenced his kingdom as a great tree that provided shelter to the world. Isn't that interesting? And so this is the dream he had. We know that from just history. And then this is sure enough. He says, "That tree is you. And your greatness reaches up to the heaven, and you rule to the ends of the earth." So this is what the dream means, your majesty, and what the Most High has declared will happen to my lord the king. You'll be driven from human society. You'll live in the fields with the wild animals. You'll eat grass like a cow, and you'll be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time will pass while you live this way, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. Now you understand why he didn't want to give this, because it was that second half of the dream where you're eating like a cow and you've been driven from all the rest of humanity. He says 7 years are going to pass while you live this way until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. Man, you've only got your job, you've only got the power because God gave it to you. He said, but the stump and the roots of the tree were left in the ground. He says, not all bad, king. This means that you will receive your kingdom back again when you've learned that heaven rules. Ooh. He could have stopped right there. You know what? He could have stopped and said, you know what, I did my job. I told you what it meant. I got to go. Tea time is in a few minutes. I got to head out. But you know what? He had the courage to do what literally could have cost him his life. He risked his life because he loved the king, and he wanted the king to know the goodness of Daniel's God. And so look what the next verse says. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning. Do what's right. Break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. And perhaps then you'll continue to prosper. Daniel had the guts to step up and say, King, I love you enough to say this. Stop sinning. Do what's right. Maybe you finally come to the point where out of humility, out of real love for the person in your family, stop wasting money and start managing it better. I'll help you. Or stop being disrespectful to me, talking to your spouse or talking to a kid and treat me right and I'll be a blessing to you. Stop living together and get married or whatever. We lovingly correct because we love each other. We all have blind spots. We all need somebody to speak the truth to us, but we need to speak the truth in love, as Jesus said, because we need each other. So as we're talking about standing up, let me give you a couple of guidelines, because I think it's important that we have some biblical guidelines as to how to manage this, to prayerfully confront. Let's use a verse from the New Testament, because we've been talking from the Old Testament. Let's use a verse from the New Testament that talks about this. Paul tells us, dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. Right path, circle that. It's not saying just accept it. You're trying to nudge them back just like Daniel did. Stop sinning and do what's right. That's the thing here. So you're helping them back onto the right path. But he says, be careful not to fall into the same temptation as yourself. Jesus gives us some guidelines as to how to help somebody get back on the right path. Jesus tells us how to confront, how to deal with these issues in Matthew chapter 18. I think this is incredibly important. If you're trying to figure this out, say you have a Christian friend, a Christian brother or sister that you know is getting off the rails and they're going in the wrong direction. You're trying to figure out what should you do. I can tell you this, you shouldn't type about it on social media. Right? You shouldn't tell a bunch of other people as prayer requests. Christians are the best at this. Oh, I've got a prayer request. Would you pray for so-and-so? I think they're having an affair, right? That kind of thing. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't give fake prayer requests. Prayer requests that are gossip, right? Instead, here's what Jesus says, Matthew 18. If another believer sins against you, so this is some kind of offense against you. He's not talking about a criminal offense here. He's talking about some kind of just personal offense. Go privately and point out the offense. So what should I do first? The first thing, if I found out that you were saying bad things about me, what should I do first? I should do what first? Go privately, right? So just go privately. Hey, man, it came to my attention that you said this and this about me. That's just not true, and I don't want things to be between us. I want to get it right. So you go first privately, because if you can, you want to protect them. Maybe they said that in a moment of weakness. Maybe they said that in a moment of jealousy. Maybe they said that in a moment when they just didn't understand what they were seeing or what they knew. Maybe that's it, and all they need is a bit of clarification. Instead of embarrassing them, and instead of shaming them, instead of doing to them what they did to you, instead you go and you gently just try to restore that personally. If the other person listens and confesses it, you've won that person back. Somebody says, you know what, you're right. I misjudged you on that, and I'm sorry. Okay, well, you won that friend back. Now your friendship's going to be stronger. But if you're unsuccessful, Jesus said, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Look at that person. It's like, oh, you're just being an idiot. That's not what I said. I didn't say that. So then maybe you take two of the other friends that are in your little group and come back and say, hey, listen, that is what was being said. I care more about the friendship than I do about what's being said, but we've got to make this right. And so you take a couple of witnesses with you, and so that everything that you say can be confirmed by two or three. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. So then that's when you go to some kind of spiritual leadership, somebody that you trust as a spiritual leader. And then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. So Jesus is telling us here that the approach really matters. The way that we go about this, go with as little confrontation as possible on the front end, as a little shame as possible on the front end, and then you have to build it up from there in order to get it. So this has been an issue in my life, especially when I was younger. I don't know if you knew this, but there was a day that I wasn't quite nearly as humble as I am today. Not nearly as gentle and kind and loving and accommodating and anyways. I tend to have a strong personality. I tend to have a lot of confidence in my decisions. And so when I was younger, I hadn't had a lot of that beat out of me yet. So I was a lot more aggressive. I wasn't very patient with people. I didn't always believe the best in others. And so some people would tell me, Jeff, you're just kind of coming off as a jerk. And I was in ministry, I was serving, but sometimes they would challenge me, you're just coming off as a jerk. And I usually thought, anybody who thinks that's just dumb and weak, right? I just didn't accept it. I was serving in a church in Texas. I was right at 30. And it had cost me friendships, it had cost me influence, it cost me opportunities. I just didn't see it. I couldn't see it. And we had a guy, he was a deacon in our church. He was kind of the most powerful person probably in the church. He was a godly man. His name was Bob Hinton. Really, 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 really good guy. He was your typical cowboy kind of guy. And he took me aside one time, and I trusted him. And I'd had some extended conversations with him in the past. I'd gone fishing with him a few times. He just was a really, really good guy. So we have this extended relationship. I admired him. I felt like he was a person I could trust. And so Bob sits down with me. He says, can I talk to you about a couple things? I said, sure. And we were driving to this thing in Houston. And he said, listen. He stopped and you know what he did? This is one of the wisest things. He bought me a sausage biscuit at McDonald's on the way to Houston. He did. Yeah, he did. Promise you. So he bought me two sausage biscuits. So we're driving. He said, Jeff, I've been thinking about this, and I just want to throw it out there because I care about you. I think you're gifted. I think that we're blessed to have you on our staff. I think that when you're operating at your best, we're all better. But there's times, I think, if you'll let me say it, there's times I think that you're not always operating at your best, and I think you got a couple blind spots. Can I offer a little bit of advice? I said, sure. So he points it out. He mentions there's a lady that had been in the church for a long time who decided she was going to square off with me, and I just wasn't going to permit it, and I squared off with her, and we were butting heads, and she was going through some tough time in her life, and I just was ignoring that. Suck it up, lady. You're a grown-up. Deal with it. Life's hard. And, that's 20, 29, 30-year-old. I had all the wisdom of the world. Tell her, suck it up and deal with it. And so he says, hey, in that situation, for instance, can I tell you something? It's not what you're saying. He said, I think I'm going to agree with you. I think what you're saying is right. It's the way you're saying it is wrong. And the attitude that you have behind it. And the fact that you have no real interest in understanding the cause behind her response. You're just mad about the response itself. And I think that's kind of immature. He said, so here's my advice and I'm done. I mean, it was this long. It was a 3-minute conversation. Here's my advice. You catch way more flies with a little honey than you do with vinegar. And for just a minute, I thought, Bob Hinton's an idiot too. I knew it. The whole church full of idiots. But then I'm sitting there looking out the window, and he turned the music on, in the truck, and it was just quiet for a little while. I'm looking out the window. It's flat. You can just see so far. The sky's big. And God just started speaking to me. You're right, Jeff. Your tongue is just sharp. You're not always kind. You don't always think the best of others. Approach really matters. Here's a guy that I know loved me. Here's a guy that had established character as a godly man that genuinely cared about the forward movement of everything that we were trying to accomplish there. And God was blessing. But the way that he approached me really mattered. The context, the fact that we had this extended relationship really mattered. I knew he cared about me, that he was godly, that he was wise. and that he wanted me to be my best. He wanted me to see this blind spot because we were going to be better together. And so let me give you a couple of prayers. There are two little prayers that might be good for you when you're thinking maybe you need to have that Bob Hinton conversation with somebody that matters to you. First of all, the first one is this: God, help me confront with the goal of restoration. Not with the goal of punishment, but with the goal of restoration. I want to fix this. This is what Paul tells us: gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. This means, God, I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to be harsh. So here's a good question for you. Do you have the goal of being right, or do you have the goal of helping them be right with God? Right? Do I just have to win because I need to be right? Or is the goal that I want them to be right with God and I want to help? So God, help me confront with the goal of restoration. And then a second prayer is this: God, help me confront with caution. Help me to be cautious, because he says to us, be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. When you're confronting, I would say this: you're very vulnerable. Anytime we're confronting somebody, we're very vulnerable to pride. How many times have I been tempted to say, well, when I was a kid, you guys have no idea. That's when I realized I started getting old, right? When I started doing the same thing. We had to walk uphill backwards, barefoot to school, both ways, right? All that kind of stuff. I was working when I was 10 years old. Get a job, hippie. Right? Start being harsh because we're prideful. We're measuring ourselves versus them, and right now we're in a superior position. Instead, Paul tells us, examine yourselves to see if your faults are genuine. If your faith is genuine, test yourselves, he says. Examine, test. Man, you got to go into this very humbly, asking God to protect you from pride, because sometimes we can see ourselves as above and others below. And in reality, we're all below God, right? We're not the judge, God is. So Jesus tells us, one of my favorite statements, Jesus says, first get rid of the log that's in your own eye, and then you'll see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. You see your friend's got a little eyelash hanging there, right? And Jesus says, get that big log out of your eye before you try to get that little eyelash out of theirs, right? Sometimes we can't even see the issues in our own life. So you have to deal it first with yourself. For many, you know, as I finish up here, because it's really neat to see what happens with Nebuchadnezzar here. For some, that's where we're at, is just aware of the fact that we need to be more like Jesus when we take a stand. Because there are many, 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 many things in life worth taking a stand for. There's many things in life you're called to take a stand for, but we have to do it with gentleness and respect. We have to speak the truth in love. There's all these components, and so I need to be more like Jesus. And this is as convicting to me as it would be to anybody else in this room. This is a big deal. And this is why God made sure that he told us this in the context of Daniel, talking to a person of power, but still being able to provide good godly advice. But for others in the room, you're in the same boat Nebuchadnezzar was, maybe. Maybe you're standing here going, you know what? God has knocked me down. I've been banished from the world of people. I feel like I'm living like an animal. I feel like I'm like this caged, I'm not moving forward in my life and all that. And I know what it is. I know the source of it. And it's just I'm fighting God. I've set myself up as my own God. And the only hope is the same hope that Nebuchadnezzar had. Here's what he says in verse 34. At the end of that time, those 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. And then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. What was the consequence? The consequence was you're going to be banished from everything that matters. You're going to be humiliated on a level that's almost incomprehensible for a man of your power, and God's doing it to you. God is doing whatever it takes to get your attention, and it will not stop until you come to the point when you finally realize that heaven rules, that the Most High is in charge, and that everything you have in your life is a gift from him. And when you come to that moment, God will restore you. And this is exactly what happens. Nebuchadnezzar comes to that moment. He finally does confess, and God begins to restore his sanity, and he begins to praise God. So for some, that's where you're at today. It's just time to give up this fight that you're fighting against God and humbly say, God, you are the God in heaven. Can I pray with you? Lord, thank you for challenging us. Every one of us has moments when we have to confront, as parents, as friends, as employers, or as employees, as family members, as neighbors. But God, help us to always be conscious of the fact that we represent Jesus in every area of our life as believers. And so help us to confront as Jesus would confront. Help us to do what Jesus would do. Help us to treat people the way Jesus would treat them, with love and respect, with gentleness and kindness. For those of you in the room that say, you know what, Jeff, I'm just like Nebuchadnezzar. I've been fighting God, and it's time. I'm ready to surrender. I'm ready to look to heaven and say, God, you're in control. I surrender. If that's you, maybe you pray a prayer like this. Maybe you say, God, I admit I'm a sinner. I do my own thing. But I believe that Jesus paid the price and rose again so I can be forgiven. Jesus, right now, I surrender. Come in and be the Lord, the King, the boss of my life. Make me new. Help me to be everything that you made me to be. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.